You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Cindy Johnson, volunteer for Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, a chapter of the American Lighthouse Foundation. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Jeremy.
Today is March 6th, 2022, and this is episode 163 of Lighthearted. I should mention that we're actually recording this on February 26th. It's Saturday night. I'm in New Hampshire here, 11 o'clock, and it's, 9 o'clock where you are in Arizona, Cindy?
That's right, 9 in Tucson here, yes.
And I think I'm speaking for most people in the world when I say my heart is with the people of Ukraine tonight.
Absolutely.
Our interview today is about Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse in Michigan, one of the oldest lighthouses on the Great Lakes. But first, has anything interesting happened on this date in lighthouse history, Cindy?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Early in the American Revolution, the New York legislature felt it was important to keep Sandy Hook Lighthouse from falling into enemy hands. In a letter dated March 6, 1776, Major William Malcolm received orders to render the lighthouse useless. He removed the lamps and oil from the lighthouse, but 3 months later, the British had it back in operation. American troops tried to destroy it with cannon fire, but the stone walls were too strong and the tower remained standing. Sandy Hook Lighthouse was built in 1764, and it still stands today, making it the oldest lighthouse tower in the United States.
Yeah, and as I'm sure many of our listeners know, Boston Light is America's oldest light station. It began service in 1716, but the first tower there was destroyed by the British in the Revolution, and it was rebuilt a few years later. So Boston Light is our oldest light station, but Sandy Hook is our oldest standing lighthouse tower. So, Cindy, please help me tell our listeners about today's interview.
Sure, Jeremy. Pointe aux Barques on Lake Huron, at the northeastern tip of the part of Michigan known as the Thumb, takes its name from a French phrase meaning point of little boats. A dangerous reef extending almost 2 miles from the point was a hazard to shipping traffic heading north along the Lake Huron shore.
The first lighthouse on the point was constructed of stone in 1848. The light station was established on a 3-acre site carved out of dense wilderness. In addition to warning mariners of the reef at Pointe aux Barques, the light served to guide shipping into Saginaw Bay and the Saginaw River.
The original keeper's house was destroyed by fire in 1849. The first tower was poorly built and had to be replaced in 1857. The new keeper's house and attached 89-foot tower were built of the finest brick available. The light remains an active aid to navigation, making Pointe aux Barques one of the oldest continuously operating lights on the Great Lakes.
The light was automated in 1934, and the last keeper left 5 years later. The light station property was transferred to Huron County in 2003. A nonprofit group, the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society, was formed. The keeper's house and lighthouse tower were restored in the years that followed.
The keeper's dwelling is now home to a museum. The museum is open seasonally, and the tower is open for climbing on special occasions. In 2017, 2 life-saving station buildings were moved to the site. The buildings were originally constructed along the shore about 1,000 feet from their current location.
Larry Becker is the past president of the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society. His wife, Marolyn, is a longtime volunteer and membership chair for the society. I had the pleasure of speaking with Marolyn and Larry a few weeks ago. Let's listen to that conversation now. I'm speaking today with Larry and Marolyn Becker of the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society in Michigan. I hope I pronounced that right. Thank you so much for joining me today, Larry and Marolyn. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
So, of course, I want to get into a little bit about the history of the lighthouse and about your preservation efforts and what there is for visitors there today. But I just want to start with a little bit about yourselves, if I could. How and when did you get involved with the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society?
In 2005, we went up. There's a beautiful campground right next to the lighthouse.
It's in the same park.
In the same park. And we were camping, and they happened to be having their festival. So we went over and got involved and talked to people. And I found out that they were doing a lot of painting in the lighthouse, and I suggested that if they needed help, I was a professional painter, I was a commercial painter at the time, that I would be willing to volunteer. And well, the next thing you know, they had me running a crew of about 30 people that were from a Comcast group that were volunteering.
So Make a Difference Day.
Make a Difference Day. We got done with the work and it turned out really, really nice. And the next thing I know, they were asking me to be on the board of directors. So for 17 years now, I've been on the board, one capacity or another, been volunteering ever since.
The last 5 years, I've taken over the membership,
Mm-hmm.
as well as working in the gift shop, helping with the ordering and inventory, and working the register on a regular basis.
We'll talk more about the organization in a few minutes, but while I'm thinking of it, I just wanted to ask you, is the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society an all-volunteer organization?
Yes, it is.
I thought so. We'll get more into that shortly, but let's talk for a while about the history of Pointe aux Barques. First, why was a lighthouse needed there in the first place?
Because it's the turning point into Saginaw Bay, the tip of the thumb. It was placed where it is today because about 2 miles out, there's a rock reef. And a lot of the early sailors were coming up and taking that turn too early and busting up on that rock reef. So they needed to put a warning light there for ships to stay out. It never was intended to bring the ships in. It was a warning light. It would tell the captains to stay out. And then further up the lake, there was another light eventually placed there at the very tip of the thumb.
In
Uh-huh.
Port Austin.
So 1848, am I remembering that right, when the light was first established?
Yes,
So, and which makes it one of the oldest light stations on the Great Lakes, right?
yes.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
one of the 10 oldest. The first light was only up for about 10 years before they realized they had to build a new one because they only used materials on the first one that were found in the area. And it was put together poorly, and they constructed the new one with Milwaukee cream brick, which was the finest brick at the time. 162 years later, it's still standing.
In the early days, for lighthouse keepers and families living there, would you say it was a really isolated place in the early days?
Oh, yes.
Very much so.
There weren't any other towns or establishments of any kind in the area when they built the first light.
Mhm.
Our first keepers came up and they just carved out about 4 or 5 acres of woods and built the lighthouse and built the keeper's house. And the keeper and his wife came up with 8 kids.
Mm.
And before they left, before the builders left, Catherine asked them to build a fence around the house so that the wild animals wouldn't take the kids away. So
Oh, wow.
it was isolated.
There were no roads to it. You could only get there by boat.
What wild animals are we talking about? Bears, wolves?
Probably both. Yep.
At the time.
At the time,
How about now?
we don't see any bears in the area anymore, but we're getting coyotes and wolves back.
Yeah,
We have fox and deer
A lot
in the
of
park.
fox, a lot of deer,
yeah.
a lot of deer.
We got all those here in the Northeast, except for the wolves. There's got plenty of coyotes though.
Yeah.
And I think you just referred to her a minute ago, but I understand Pointe aux Barques had the first woman lighthouse keeper in Michigan. Can you tell me a
Yes.
bit about her?
Her husband, Peter, left Pointe aux Barques to go to Port Huron to pick up supplies.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, they got into bad weather and the ship that he was on went down and all hands were lost. By the time the life-saving service got back to the lighthouse, they found Catherine and the older kids maintaining and taking care of the lighthouse very well.
I don't think we've said her last name yet. Her last
Sure.
name was,
Sorry.
Catherine Shook.
Peter and Catherine Shook.
yeah. Mhm.
Peter was the first keeper.
So
They
then
offered at the
Catherine
time.
Shook took over. They offered her the position and she took it. And she ran the lighthouse for another full season. And then the following season, she had to back down from it because of her health. And she moved back here to New Baltimore, where we live today. And about 5 years later, she passed away from her illnesses. And she's buried right here in New Baltimore.
In the history of families living at that light station, anything else that jumps to mind? Anything that stands out for you in that history?
Well, there were quite a few interesting keepers. One hit the last keeper. He stayed there for 35 years, which is a very long term for a lighthouse keeper.
Yeah.
We had one that jumps out that is kind of a
Character?
Chauncey
Sheldon.
Chauncey Sheldon. The story is that he was a freedom fighter, and he and a group of men went over to Canada to kind of get rid of the British, is what the idea was. They were going to allow the Canadians to be an independent country also, like themselves. But they unfortunately got captured, and quite a few of them were either shot on sight or hung for treason. And he happened to be spared, and he and a few of the other gentlemen that were captured ended up in Australia at the penal colony. Wow. And then because the United States wanted to deal with Britain, some kind of a deal went down, and the Queen pardoned these gentlemen. So they let them out of jail in Australia and said, see you later. They had no money. They had no means of transportation. Well, Chauncey got on board a ship that was taking sugarcane to Cuba. And he worked his way over there. And then he ended up in Mexico. And then he ended up in Florida. And this was all due to getting jobs on board ships, and had to work his way for passage, and ended up coming up the coastline and back to Michigan. Wow. And to the little area of Port Hope. Well, through all this, he learned a lot. He suffered a lot, I would imagine. And they appointed him lighthouse keeper to give him a place to stay and do a job that wasn't so demanding.
Wow. Probably welcomed the change, even though it was isolated and probably difficult in a lot of ways.
Right. It's a very interesting story, and I just touched on it really, but we have an article on it up at the lighthouse, and there's different stories of various keepers that were there, little things that happened here and there. We have all of the log books, and we have those open in a case where people can read them. And if they ask, we can turn a page or move a book back in.
I think an interesting story, and I'll let Larry tell it, but the storm of 1913, where the assistant keeper and his son.
Yeah, during the storm of 1913, I don't know if you ever heard about that story, but it was a massive storm that came up over the Great Lakes, and it lasted for over 3 days. It took down 12 ships throughout the Great Lakes, 8 right in Lake Huron. Wow. And the keeper, assistant keeper, and the keeper's son stayed up in the tower just keeping the lamp lit. And the keeper wrote in the logbook that it was blowing so hard that it was the first time that he ever felt the tower shake. And it was shaking so violently that the wick was falling back down into the lantern. Mm-hmm. So they just had a relay going, trying to keep that lantern lit.
Yeah.
We had quite a few assistant keepers, and we had one that the wife passed away during childbirth. And so everyone claims that her ghost is still floating around there.
Oh, really?
I've never seen it.
Well, every lighthouse needs a ghost story.
Yes, it needs a ghost story. Yep.
Yeah. Do you have volunteers who've claimed any kind of experiences there?
Yes, we've had people that will not go into the assistant keeper's house. We had one group that told us their dog wouldn't go upstairs. that he just sat at the bottom of the stairs barking. I don't
There's
know.
no proof one way or the other with these
No.
things, but
No.
it adds to the lore, the
Yeah.
allure of these places for sure. For a lot of people, there's no doubt about that. So obviously, over the years, there were a number of wrecks. You mentioned that storm in 1913, and I'm sure there were through the years other shipwrecks in the vicinity. One that I've read about, a fairly modern one, was the Daniel J. Morrill.
Morale.
It's pronounced Morale.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's tricky.
Yeah.
Anyway, could you tell me about that wreck?
Yes, that was 1966, so it wasn't that far back. During a storm, she was upbound in ballast and going up for the last load, and they got up kind of parallel to the lighthouse, and the ship broke in two. There was one survivor, Dennis Hale, and his story was he heard a big bang and he came up on deck. He was in the forward part of the ship, and he looked back and he could see into the hole. And he turned around to go back to his room to get clothes to put on because he just had his pajamas on. And he heard another crack bang. And by that time, all the electricity went out. It was all from the back of the ship. And he grabbed his coat and put it on. And he came back up on deck, and someone shoved a life jacket into his chest, and he put that on. And moments later, he was washed overboard. Fortunately, came up, and there was a life raft right there with a couple of other sailors in it that helped him on board. Of course, they were saying, what do we do now? Well, he was looking for the flare gun, and one of the other members found it, and he shot it off right away. And it broke under the cold conditions, and they couldn't get another one off. But they looked and saw a string of lights coming, and they thought it was another ship coming to rescue them. And then they realized that it was the stern of the Morale continuing to motor up the lake. When he made it to shore and they rescued him, he told them that story, and they said there's no way that the stern of the ship could continue to motor up the lake.
And they said he was delirious from the cold, and
He was imagining things. But years later, when they found the wreck, they found the bow first and did a grid search, and the stern was about 6 miles away.
Uh-huh.
So definitely, the only way it could have gotten there was under its own power.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting story, and he went through a lot. He wrote a couple of books on it, and very interesting what he had to go through. Besides the cold, a lot of trauma, survivor's guilt, things like that, that he went through. He just passed away here, I think it was 2018, I believe.
2018. Yeah. He was supposed to speak at our festival that year, and he died in the spring.
Yeah.
But we've been fortunate enough to meet him on 3 different occasions at Lighthouse activities, and a very interesting man.
Tell me his name again.
Dennis Hale, Hale.
Dennis Hale. Okay. And you say he wrote a couple of books about the experience?
The first book he wrote it's called The Lone Survivor. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's quite a story. You mentioned that there was an assistant keeper at the station for a long time. I believe the assistant keeper's house was added to the station in 1908, if I have that right.
Yes.
And that house has been recently restored. Am I right about that?
Yes. Yep. We redid the bathroom. It's all tile now with a walk-in shower for the volunteers to be able to get in and out easily. We cleaned it all up, painted it, redid the floors, put new furniture in there, trying to keep an older look to it. Not exactly period, but close.
Mm-hmm.
And we are using that for our keepers program now. We allow people to come up. They, of course, have to volunteer at the lighthouse, but it's $100 a week per person. And you come in on Monday,
Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah, because Monday's going to be cleaning day.
Mhm.
Come in on Tuesday and leave on Sunday. And you put in, 35 hours at the lighthouse.
Sounds like a good deal to me.
Yeah,
Do
and
you-
we can accommodate up to 4 people in your group.
And
So,
what is the season for that?
the first week of June through the end of September.
Okay. And do you generally fill it up? Maybe, I don't know if it's been any different in the last couple of years with.
This is just our second season.
Oh, okay.
And at this point, I believe we have 8 of the 10 weeks filled.
So is there like an application process or is it just?
Yes.
Yeah, there is. Mhm.
There is an application process, and that's on our website.
And the website is Pointe aux Barques lighthouse.org. And before we're finished today, we'll spell that for people in case they have no idea how to spell it.
Last year was our first year. We didn't have too many, but the ones we did have were fantastic. It was just amazing that these people are so interested in other lighthouses. They came, from other lighthouses. The one couple did how many?
15. We were their 15th lighthouse.
That
And they
lived at
actually
for-
live in Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh. Do
And-
you know who
and
that was? It might be somebody I know. I'm not sure.
Jack and Toby?
Graham.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I was going to say, was that Jack Graham? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific people. They were just super.
Yeah. Jack writes a lot for the U.S. Lighthouse Society's magazine,
Right.
Right.
Keeper's Log, and he occasionally asks me if I know this or that. But more often he teaches me. I learn things from him that he uncovers in his research.
Constantly learning from
Yes.
him.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's great. It's really good to hear that you're getting a good response with that program. So let's talk about the museum. The museum is in the principal keeper's house. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And can you tell me about the museum? Just basically what is there for visitors to see?
We have a lot of artifacts that were brought up from wrecks. We have one of the old capstans that was probably on the bow of a sailing vessel. We have a couple of things off the Daniel J. Morrell that floated in, a searchlight off of that ship, various things like that. We have different stories of the ships that have gone down around the bottomland preserve there.
We have a lot of ship models that have been built by local people and donated. We have models of the old life-saving station in there. We have what's believed to be one of the oldest known maps of Michigan.
1864.
And it's probably 6 foot by 5 foot
Yeah.
on the wall. It's huge. It's
Uh-huh.
very interesting. Our pride and joy is our Fresnel Lens.
Yes.
Mhm, mhm.
And we have that on display. It's rotating. It's got the light on. We have the aerial beacons that replaced the Fresnel Lens as
Yeah.
well in there.
They're on display also.
Right.
Mhm.
The upstairs has period furniture of the time. It has the rope bed. There's a piano, little tiny
Travel piano.
travel
Yeah.
piano,
Hmm.
but furniture of the period that the families would have used.
Well, since you brought it up, let's talk a little bit more about the lens. It's a third order Fresnel lens, right? And it was
Mhm.
used for a number of years in the lighthouse, and it went somewhere else for some years, right?
Yes.
And was returned by the Coast Guard. Can you tell me a little bit about that process,
Well,
how that happened?
It came to our tower in 1873. They replaced it with the 2 aerial beacons in 1965.
Mhm.
And then it went back to Detroit and then
To the Coast Guard
to the
station.
Coast Guard station. Yep. And Harbor Beach, which is just down the road from us, had a museum, and they got their 4th order Fresnel lens and asked if they could have the 3rd order Fresnel lens to put on display. And the Coast Guard okayed it. They had all their paperwork in order. And as it was there, over the years, the people from Huron City, who had a historical place there, they had moved the life-saving station up to Huron City, along with, they had one of the oldest churches in the area. They had different buildings there, House of Seven Gables. And it was a little kind of a walk through historical
Village.
And he went to Harbor Beach and basically told them that he was taking the third order Fresnel Lens and putting it into his museum up there. And they allowed him to take it. Now, we don't know how that all happened because, of course, nobody wants to get in trouble. But that's basically the story that we got. But getting it back from them was a 5-year struggle. It wasn't until the information came about that fully identified that particular lens as being the lens from the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the Coast Guard stepped in and said, okay, we're going to take you to federal court to get it back. It's going to cost you $15,000 to go to court. What do you want to do? And at that point, they said, come and get the lens. Mm-hmm. So the Coast Guard from Harbor Beach went up with the lampist who worked on it, and they took it apart and they took it to Harbor Beach Coast Guard Station, and the lampist restored it there.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought it back to the lighthouse, and it's on display there.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to be involved with putting it back together because I was tall enough to reach the top screws.
Wow.
So they put me inside of it and just kept putting panels around me. So
That was the lampist, Kurt Fosberg. Is that who?
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I know him. I just saw him recently in Rhode Island. He was involved with moving a fourth order lens from the Palm Rocks Lighthouse in the Providence River back into their museum that had been somewhere else for years and years.
Yeah. Yes, he was quite the character also with the stories that he had.
Yeah.
Very interesting man. Very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he does a tremendous job.
Oh, yes.
Definitely recommend him to anybody who's looking. There's several qualified lampists, but he's certainly at the top of the list.
I want to give Jim Woodward a shout out too.
Yeah.
He was the one that discovered our lens, and he knew from his experience
Mm-hmm.
that that lens did belong to Pointe aux Barques, but it just took legal paperwork and everything else to get it. But he's the one that pointed it out to us, and he's the one that said we should have it.
Yeah.
At the lighthouse.
Good for him. I know Jim Woodward too, or Woody as people call him. He's kind of the dean of the lampists. He's and he's still active. That's great to hear. You got two great people involved there, Jim Woodward and Kurt Fosberg. Back to the lighthouse tower itself. Is the lighthouse ever open for climbing?
Yes, it is. We have a schedule. It's always open on the holidays, 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day, major holidays. And then we have our festival, which is always the first Saturday in August.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be open that Saturday. And then 2 weeks later,
Yes,
right?
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later is ABC Days in Port Hope, which is right down 6 miles down the road from us.
Little festival.
And yeah, it's just a little bean. They have the history of being Bean Town. So
I thought Boston was Beantown.
yeah.
Oh, that's Beantown in Michigan.
Yeah, right. But we get a lot of visitors, so we decided a couple years back that we'll open the lighthouse on that day also.
Mm-hmm.
And then our festival weekend.
In the last weekend in September.
The last weekend in September is Huron County Museum Days. All the museums in the county are open that weekend.
Doing special events.
Yep, doing
Okay.
special events.
We do have a calendar of events also on our website. So if people want to double check when the tower
The
is
actual
open,
date.
so that's where they would find that information.
Great. You mentioned the Heritage Festival in August. What else happens with that festival?
We have music. We try to get it to the period music. Sometimes, we just have rock and roll or whatever, but we do food. In the past, we've had a food truck come in. We do roast corn. We have a lot of vendors that show up and have their crafts for sale.
the tower's open for climbing. We have a ham radio there that's always involved with the lighthouses, and he's broadcasting from there. On the porch of the Lightkeepers House is a huge porch, and that's where we always put the bands, and we have a canopy that we put up with chairs underneath, and a lot of people just sit
For
there and enjoy their food and listen to the bands. We got people over here dancing. It's just a nice summer day. Before
Sounds-
COVID, we'd have like a bounce house and things of that nature for kids,
Yeah.
but with the COVID, that's out.
Yeah, well, hopefully they'll have that back. What more could you want? Food, music, and a lighthouse? It sounds
Yeah,
And Lake
Exactly.
Huron,
in Lake Huron.
like you're.
I mean,
Yeah.
the view there is just phenomenal.
So do you also have other events? Do you have weddings there?
Yes, over the years, we've had quite a few weddings. They generally have them right out in front of the lighthouse so that in all the pictures, they get a shot of the lighthouse. We ask that they don't do it on a holiday weekend when we have the place loaded with visitors to climb the tower. It would be too confusing, but so far it has worked out for their benefit.
Some of them actually rent the pavilions in the park and have the reception there. Sometimes it's just a wedding and then the reception is off
Mhm.
site.
Since you just mentioned it, could you just maybe say a little bit more about the park? What else is there besides the lighthouse for people to do or see when they come to the
There's a
park?
full campground there,
Mhm.
trailer. They have full hookup in the back, just electrical out towards the lighthouse. We call it the front. Very nice campground, very well kept. That's all part of Huron County campgrounds.
And they have six rustic cabins
Yeah.
to rent. As you pull into the park, as you pull in, you just see this beautiful lighthouse as you make a little curve in the road through the trees. You got the beautiful lighthouse in front of you, and to the right would be the campground. And to the left, they have a big playscape, a more picnic area, couple pavilions for family picnics and things of that nature.
And
There is a beach there, but it's a very rocky beach. That's not something you want to bring the kids and spend the afternoon.
although people do,
Yes,
they just tell the kids to be careful.
Yeah, probably not a beach where you run around in your bare feet very easily.
No,
you need water
you need
shoes.
water shoes, definitely.
You mentioned it a couple of times, COVID having an effect on things, but I'm just curious, were you able to open the place at all these past couple of seasons?
Last year we did, 2 years ago we didn't. We limited like the tower climbs to family units or if you rode up together in the car, you can climb the tower together. Yeah, and it worked well.
We have to do it that way. We can only send at the most 6 people up at a time. Someone has to be up at top and someone at the bottom controlling the crowd. It takes a group of at least 5 people to run the tower and do it safely the way the Coast Guard wants us to do it
Yeah.
and the way that the county wants us to do it.
Right, it's still an active light maintained by
Yes.
the Coast Guard.
Yeah.
So we can't let them up into the workroom or the
Into
clock
the-
room.
So they don't actually go up to the lantern room or the light.
No,
No.
they don't.
I imagine maybe they can get a peek up into the
Oh,
lantern
yes.
at the light.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Generally, like on a 4th of July weekend, we put 150 people through there a day.
Mhm.
So to get them out and back in would just be asking for trouble.
How many stairs in the lighthouse?
There's 87 stairs to the workroom, 105 to the very top.
So it takes a little while to just to get people up and down. I know some
Right.
people are faster than
Yeah.
others going up and down those stairs. too.
Correct.
Right,
But for lighthouse buffs, even if they can't get up into the lantern or get outside, it always adds so much to actually be able to climb a tower.
Right.
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 Plus, there's a window, facing the lake that we open and you can take pictures, and most people really enjoy the view from up there.
Let's talk for a few minutes about the life-saving station there. There was a life-saving station nearby there that was relocated for years
Yes.
and then was moved back to your site in 2017.
It was established in 1876, and it was first just a small boathouse with, of course, the boat. And over the years, it grew into a pretty good size operation up there. The original boathouse and keeper's house, or captain's house, we call it, was moved in 1964 up to Huron City. Again, they asked if they could move it up there. The county was at the point where they had to do something because kids were running around in there and they were afraid someone was going to get hurt. So the Huron County people moved it up there, and it stayed up there until 2017. Just prior to that, they came and asked if we wanted it back because they could no longer afford to maintain it, and it needed attention, needed a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So between the county and our organization, we decided to have it moved back. They couldn't put it where it originally sat, so it's kind of off to the back of the lighthouse, but facing the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in the process of restoring it. It's going to take a lot, but we had the HSR report done on it last year. They're still working on that.
Yeah.
But one of the first things we had to do was abate all of the plaster in the captain's house. Over the years, it had gotten a lot of mold on it. And of course, you can't take the public through a place like that. So we had that all abated last year and new roofs put on it. It's watertight. It's got a real nice, the county made a beautiful foundation for it. And it's sitting high and dry now. And this year we're hoping to get the chimneys put back on and the lookout walkway that was up on it originally. We're just trying to raise money to get it up to a quality museum.
So you'll have exhibits in there eventually?
Yes, a lot of artifacts came with it, which are being stored right now, but they will be on display. It's going to be very nice. With everything that came with it, I think we can put on a real nice museum display with that.
So a question occurred to me a minute ago when you used the words high and dry. As mentioned, the building is high and dry on its new foundation. You know, I know in recent years, the water levels on the Great Lakes went way up. I think they've gone back down again.
Yes.
In the last couple of years. But is that something you're concerned about, the water levels on Lake Huron?
Not at this point. We're kind of on a bluff that's about, good 5 foot off the water line, off the water right now. We have quite a bit of rock and slag that's out in front. Back years ago, they put a concrete breaker out right in front of the lighthouse. And you can see how that's helped the erosion there.
Mm-hmm.
But with the water being back down right now, the water table is very low.
That's good.
Right now, we're not worried about it.
Good. I hope you don't have to worry about it in the future. You mentioned it earlier, but what is the Thumb Area Great Lakes State Bottomland Preserve?
Yes. Well, from about Harbor Beach, Port Sanilac, which is even lower, I think it goes down to Port Sanilac and around the Thumb area, that is a bottomland reserve. And basically what that means is you can dive on these shipwrecks, but you cannot take anything off of them. You cannot take anything off the bottom that was from a shipwreck. There's items that people have found over the years that they had to wait until the waves pushed them up on shore and the water level go down before they can retrieve it. We have a rib from one of the shipwrecks that a gentleman waited. It took him about 5 years before he could legally take that off of his beach and bring it up to the lighthouse, put it on display. But
How many ships are down there?
in that area, there are 105 known shipwrecks.
Wow.
They know these ships, they know the names. Last year, as a matter of fact, right off of Grindstone City, they found another shipwreck with the high water and then the water retreating like it has these divers who had been diving that area for years were testing some equipment, and they came across this shipwreck. And it's not that big of a shipwreck. It was I think like 38 foot. It was a small sailing vessel called a Mackinac. And they basically used that for transportation. They didn't really haul any goods in it. It was to go from one town to the next up and down the lake.
Mm-hmm.
But they figure it's one of the oldest shipwrecks they've found so far.
The tip of the thumb, and then just north of that in Alpena, the two areas have the most shipwrecks on the Great Lakes.
In Thunder Bay up by Alpena, there's 80 shipwrecks, known shipwrecks.
Yeah.
Right.
So between the two, there's Lake Huron claimed more ships than the rest of the lakes. There's a reason for that. It was the most traveled.
Yeah, it shows the activity there. And I'm sure there's probably many other vessels, smaller vessels, especially we don't know the names of, that are down there as well.
Right.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about your organization again. Are you in need of more volunteers? Is that something you're always looking for?
Always.
We're always looking for volunteers. The tip of the thumb is not real populated. So our volunteer bases, a lot of them are the campers in the park.
Yep.
We're seasonal campers, and there's several of us like that. We go up the 1st of May and stay until October 15th. So, that's where a lot of our volunteer base comes from. In the little cities, we get a couple from each little town, but it's not highly populated.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always in search of volunteers.
Okay, I hope maybe somebody listening who isn't too far from there or might consider spending a summer there would be interested.
Right.
And I imagine there's some information, there's contact information, of course, on the
Right.
website. POINTEAUXBUES.org. I think I got that right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, but if people Google Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse, they'll find it as well. Just want to ask you a final question. This is for both of you, and this is for bonus points, okay? And what has been your favorite thing about your involvement with the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society?
Well, the history is one of my favorite things, but the people, meeting people from all over the world. We've had people, you name it, they've been there. It's amazing. In fact, one of my favorite stories is I was talking to a gentleman who was from Germany, and he, of course, is speaking broken English. So we're having a little bit of a problem communicating. But I asked him, I said, why, of all the places that you could go, why would you come to the tip of the thumb? And he was explaining to me that when he was a child, he was very interested in maps. And every time he saw a map of the United States with that mitten sitting there, he always wondered what was at the tip of the thumb, because he said you have to go up and you have to come back down. So there's no other way out of there. So what's up there that attracts people? And he said, and I came to find out, and this is just beautiful. He pointed to the lighthouse and he pointed to the lake. He says, it's not what I expected, because the Great Lakes I didn't think were that big. And he says, I can't see the other side. So it was really kind of fun talking to him, because I never thought of it that way. You're up there in the middle of a thumb, and there's only one way in and one way out.
Marolyn, anything you want to add about your favorite thing or things about your involvement?
Well, I work in the gift shop a lot. And again, just talking to the people and meeting the people is fascinating. I just enjoy working, and why they showed up there and the different people. I think one of my favorite stories is Larry was talking to a gentleman, and he was just looking at the lake, and he was just in awe of Lake Huron and how huge it was. And again, the Great Lakes. And he had talked about, he was in the military, he'd been around the world, he'd been on the East Coast, the West Coast, and we asked where he was from, and he said Rochester, Michigan.
Novi.
Oh, Novi.
He's from Novi.
which is probably about 15 miles away from one of the lakes.
Uh-huh.
And like, how could you grow up there and not know the Great Lakes? Just, we've got people from around the world that get it, but
It was the first time that he ever stood at the shore of one of the Great Lakes.
Wow.
And he grew up in Michigan, but he got out of high school. He joined the Navy right away, and they sent him traveling all over the world. And
Yeah.
it's comical because a lot of people come up from all these other countries, and they came specifically to see what was up there at the Thumb. And then you got people that lived in the state that
have no idea.
I think that's true everywhere. I lived in the Boston area most of my life, and the Boston Harbor Islands are just fascinating. There's more than 30 islands in the harbor. There's the oldest lighthouse in America, Boston Light, and a few other lighthouses. And it's just such a fascinating area. And I was always meeting people who lived in or close to Boston for many years and didn't know there were harbor islands, absolutely nothing about Boston. So that's often true that people don't realize what's in their backyard or don't visit. So it's one of the nice things about lighthouses is that they're a magnet for bringing people to those places.
Oh, there are.
Yes.
There are.
Yes.
And it's funny because the western side of Michigan is very built up touristy.
Mm-hmm.
The Thumb is not. The Thumb is still very rural, and people will come up and they'll say, "This is so peaceful over here. We don't tell anybody."
Yeah.
We don't want it to turn into a big tourist area.
Yeah.
We love the peace and quiet.
Yeah. You don't want people to love it to death like they do some places.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Marolyn and Larry Becker, it's really a pleasure talking with you today. I appreciate so much you spending this time with me. You have a great organization, a very beautiful place, as you've said, a place that I need to visit one of these years, and I will. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I very much appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And if you come up, just ask who's ever there, where Larry and Marolyn are.
Again, to learn more about the Pointe aux Barques Lighthouse Society, you can visit pointeauxbarqueslighthouse.org online. That's POINTEAUXBARQUES lighthouse.org. The website includes the application for the Assistant Keepers Program, which provides an opportunity to stay at the light station while helping the organization as a volunteer.
I'm actually planning a trip to Michigan in April next month, and Pointe aux Barques is on my itinerary. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you again to Marolyn and Larry Becker for today's interview.
And thanks, as always, to the members, volunteers, and staff of the U.S. Lighthouse Society and all its chapters and affiliates. Learn more about the tours and everything else the Society offers by checking out uslhs.org. Memberships and donations support this podcast and other lighthouse preservation and education initiatives.
If you listen to this podcast using Apple Podcasts or any platform that allows you to post reviews, please rate and review us. And if you enjoy this podcast, please tell your friends and share it on social media. Coming up next on Lighthearted will be a two-part interview with Terry Cole and his wife Jerry. Terry was the resident park ranger at Fort Point Lighthouse in Maine for more than 30 years.
And speaking of the Great Lakes, the ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once wrote, quote, "Make your heart like a lake with a calm, still surface and great depths of kindness," unquote.
As always, thanks for listening and
keep a good light.
Let it shine, let it shine.